What starts as just another courtroom hearing turns into something no one saw coming. They thought they were putting a scared, quiet black teenager on trial. They thought they could humiliate him, silence him, and make him disappear, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Darius Bennett isn't just some kid with a laptop. He's the one person who's about to bring their entire system crashing down. This is more than a courtroom fight. It's a battle for the truth, a fight against corruption, and a race to survive before the system buries him for good. And believe me, you won't believe how this ends until we dive in. So grab a seat, turn up the volume, and let us know in the comments what time are you watching this and where are you tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. You ever walk into a place and just feel like it wasn't built for you? Like every wall is closing in, every eye is watching, and no matter what you do, you're already guilty? That's exactly what it felt like for 17-year-old Darius Bennett as he stood in courtroom 17B of the Jackson County Courthouse in Kansas City, Missouri. The room wasn't just full, it was packed. Standing room only, people lining the back walls, shoulders pressed tight together, breathing in the same thick air, heavy with something that had nothing to do with justice. It wasn't justice they came for, it was the show. They came to see the teen hacker who'd somehow rattled the state. The headlines had already branded him a cybercriminal. Black teen hacker threatens state security, quiet teen or dangerous mastermind. The media had been eating it up for days, and today, the crowd showed up to see it for themselves. Not to find the truth, but to watch him burn. And right there in the center of it all stood Darius. Thin, lanky, wearing a wrinkled white button-up shirt 2 sizes too big for him, his shoulders slumped, his hands buried deep in his pockets, and his eyes locked down on the floor like he was counting the scratches in the wood. To the people watching, he looked like just another scared black kid, lost, out of place, maybe slow, maybe dumb, maybe exactly what they expected. The whispers started early. You could hear them ripple through the room like a quiet wave. Is that him? Doesn't even look smart enough to turn on a computer. Probably autistic or something. Can't even look up. Poor kid doesn't even know where he is. The laughter was low but sharp, cutting through the air like tiny knives. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to humiliate Darius one more time, he spoke. Judge Clarence Whitaker. Sitting high above them all on his polished oak bench, one hand lazily gripping the gavel, the other resting on his chin like he was already bored out of his mind. He leaned forward, narrowed his eyes, and let out a mocking little breath through his nose. Look at him, the judge sneered, shaking his head. A hacker, a criminal, and now a mute. The room chuckled again, this time louder. Even the jury shifted in their seats, some of them smiling like this whole thing was some kind of joke. The prosecution smirked over at the defense table like they already had this in the bag. And honestly, why wouldn't they think that? Darius had said nothing, had done nothing, just stood there, still, small, silent. Judge Whitaker leaned even further over the bench, staring down at Darius like he was looking through him, like he was trying to confirm every ugly assumption in his mind. Do you even understand where you are, boy? He mocked, dragging out that last word like it was dirt in his mouth. The courtroom broke into quiet laughter again. You could hear it all. Low chuckles from the jury, snickering from the prosecution's table. Even some of the spectators in the back couldn't hold back their smiles. And through it all, Darius never moved. Not an inch. He just kept staring down at the floor like the weight of the whole damn building was pressing down on him. Like he was carrying something none of them could even see. His grandfather, Walter Bennett, sat in the front row, clutching the edge of the pew so tight his knuckles had turned ghost white. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. You could see it in his face. Pain, anger, helplessness. This wasn't just a courtroom to Walter, this was a war zone, and his grandson was standing on the front line with no armor, no shield, and no backup. But then, something happened. Darius lifted his head. Not slow, not hesitant, not like someone scared to speak. He lifted it like he'd been waiting for this moment all day. His dark, eye-sharp, focus had locked onto Judge Whitaker with a coldness that made the air in the room shift. And just like that, the laughter died, the snickers stopped, the jury froze, the prosecutor's smirk disappeared. Even Judge Whitaker leaned back, just slightly, like he'd felt something shift in the ground beneath him. The whole room held its breath. And then Darius spoke. His voice wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but it was steady, unshaken, like the voice of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. "Your Honor," Darius said, loud enough for every single ear in that courtroom to hear, "if you're done mocking me, may I correct the mistake in your ruling before you send an innocent man to prison?" And just like that, the room stood still. Not a breath, not a sound, not a single soul dared to move, because for the first time all day, the power in that room had shifted. And everyone knew it. Most people in that courtroom had already decided who Darius Bennett was before he ever opened his mouth. They didn't see a kid. They didn't see potential. They didn't see a future. They saw trouble. But if you stepped outside that courthouse, if you turned back the clock just a few months, you'd see a very different story. Darius wasn't some reckless hacker trying to cause chaos. He wasn't trying to embarrass the justice system, and he sure wasn't some mastermind criminal like the media painted him to be. He was just a kid. A quiet one. One of those kids most people overlooked. You see, Darius never fit in. Not at school, not in his neighborhood, not even in the family circles where people whispered that Walter had taken on more than he could handle by raising a boy like that all on his own. But Walter never listened to them. He saw something in Darius no one else bothered to look for. While other kids played basketball on the cracked courts of their Kansas City neighborhood, Darius would sit on the front porch with an old second-hand laptop balanced on his knees. Walter had worked overtime at the warehouse to buy it for him. It wasn't much beat up, scratched. The screen flickered sometimes, but to Darius, it was everything. Darius didn't laugh at jokes he didn't find funny. He didn't care about fitting in with the crowd. He didn't fake small talk just to be liked. What he cared about was code, lines and lines of code. Where other people saw chaos, Darius saw patterns. Where others got bored, Darius got lost in algorithms, in systems, in the elegant dance of problem-solving. Technology made sense. People didn't. And that's what made him dangerous, at least in the eyes of people who never took the time to understand him. They called him weird, said he was probably autistic, said something wasn't right with that boy, but they never asked him, never gave him the chance to explain. Because when the world doesn't understand you, it's easier to slap a label on you than it is to actually see you. Walter knew better. He'd seen Darius pull apart an old radio at the kitchen table just to rebuild it better than before. He'd watched him stay up late, teaching himself programming languages most adults had never even heard of. He'd seen that spark in his grandson's eyes, the one that told him Darius wasn't just smart, he was special. And that's where it all started. With a project Darius called Blind Justice. It was never meant to be anything big, just something to keep his mind sharp. A tool that scanned public court records, searching for inconsistencies, misfiled evidence, contradictory statements, human errors in the system that nobody bothered to fix. Walter thought it was impressive, but harmless. Darius thought so too, until the night everything changed. He was sitting on that same porch, hood pulled up over his head, the glow of the laptop screen lighting up his face in the dark. Walter had already gone to bed. It was just Darius. The cool night air, and the soft hum of crickets filling the silence. He had run Blind Justice 100 times before. Most cases were textbook arrests, charges, convictions, the usual stuff. But that night, something different popped up. Case number 17 to 44,829. State of Missouri versus Leonard Moore. Leonard Moore, a 50-year-old security guard arrested 6 months ago for armed robbery at a convenience store on the east side of town. According to the prosecution, Moore had walked in with a ski mask and a gun, emptied the register, and fled the scene. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict him. Open and shut, they said. But Blind Justice didn't agree. As Darius scrolled through the records, a tiny red flag blinked on his screen. A timestamp error. Small, insignificant, to anyone not looking for it. But Darius was looking. The security footage showed Moore entering the store at 8:17 p.m. But another line buried deep in the court records said Moore had clocked in to work across town at 8:10 p.m. 7 minutes earlier. It wasn't possible. He couldn't be in two places at once. Darius dug deeper. He cross-referenced time zones, double-checked every record. And then, he found it. The metadata on the video file, the digital fingerprints that told the story behind the scenes had been altered. Someone had tampered with the footage. Darius' stomach dropped. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone had framed Leonard Moore, and if Darius was right, an innocent man was sitting in a cell right now for something he didn't do. He should have stopped there, closed the laptop, walked away. But how could he? He'd seen the truth. He knew the truth. And that's the thing about knowing something deep down in your gut. You can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. So Darius did the one thing no one expected. He decided to do something about it. Darius knew the second he crossed that line, there was no turning back. What started as curiosity had become a fight for the truth. He didn't know where it would lead, just knew Leonard Moore didn't deserve to rot in prison for something he didn't do. And if nobody else was going to do something about it, then maybe, just maybe, it had to be him. He started small, quiet, careful, digging deeper into the files, cross-checking employee logs from Moore's security job, pulling public records that showed Moore's car had been ticketed outside his workplace that very same night at 8:12 p.m. Time-stamped, logged, undeniable. But there was a problem. The public records only told part of the story. Darius needed to see what was behind the sealed evidence files. The raw, unedited video. The real metadata. The kind of records that weren't open to the public. He tried to tell himself to stop, to leave it alone. But every time he looked at the clock, every time he closed his laptop, something gnawed at his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. What if that was him sitting in that cell? What if it was Walter? He couldn't let it go. And that's when he made the decision. The decision that would change everything. It was just after midnight. The house was dead silent. Walter had gone to bed hours ago. Darius sat alone in the living room, the blue glow of the screen lighting up his face. His heart raced, his palms sweating just a little. He knew what he was about to do wasn't legal, but in his mind, it was right. He fired up Blind Justice again, but this time, he didn't just scan public files. This time, he went deeper. The Missouri State Judicial Database wasn't exactly unbreakable, no, if you knew what you were doing, and Darius did. He'd spent years studying security systems, firewalls, digital footprints. He knew how to slip past defenses without setting off alarms. And that night, he did exactly that. It wasn't like the movies. No flashing lights, no red warning signs. Just line after line of code on the screen, his fingers moving faster than his thoughts, bypassing security logs, masking his digital signature, sliding through the system like a ghost. And there it was. The full case file for Leonard Moore, all of it. He found the raw video evidence, the original footage from the convenience store. He ran it through his verification tools, and just like he feared, the metadata had been manipulated. The timestamp had been overwritten. The file had been altered. But it didn't stop there. Darius kept digging, and that's when his heart nearly stopped. He found the edit log, and in that log, a user ID, a name, M. Price, Morgan Price. The assistant district attorney on the case. Darius's breath caught in his throat. The DA? The one who sent Moore away? It wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. And the man behind it was the same one sitting in that courtroom just a few hours ago, smiling like he already knew the verdict. Darius sat back in his chair, running his hands over his face. This was bigger than he ever imagined. This wasn't just one bad arrest. This was corruption, deep corruption. He didn't know what to do. Should he go to the police? Would they even believe him? He thought about telling Walter. But what could Walter do? He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a politician. He was just a tired old man who'd already done more than anyone had ever asked for. Darius knew he was on his own. But before he could make a move, before he could figure out what to do next, his world came crashing down. It started with headlights. Bright, blinding. Flooding through the living room window. Multiple cars. Darius froze. His heart slammed in his chest like a drum. Then came the sound. Boots on gravel. Doors slamming. Radios crackling. No, this can't be happening. He barely had time to close the laptop before boom, boom, boom. A fist hammered against the front door so hard it rattled the hinges. Kansas City Police, open up! Darius's body locked up. His mind raced. What do I do? Where do I go? But it was already too late. The door exploded open with a deafening crack. Officers flooded the hallway. Shouts filled the air. Down, hands behind your head. Walter came stumbling out of his bedroom, eyes wide in terror. "Wait, what are you doing? He's just a kid." But they didn't care. They shoved Walter aside like he was nothing. Darius barely had time to blink before he was face down on the floor. A knee pressed into his back, cold steel cuffs snapping around his wrists. "You're under arrest for unauthorized access to government systems." His mouth went dry. He couldn't breathe. Walter's voice cracked as he tried to fight through the wall of officers. "You've got the wrong kid. He didn't do anything." But the officers didn't even look back. They dragged Darius out of the house, his bare feet scraping against the porch steps. And when he hit the front yard, the flash of cameras blinded him. Reporters, dozens of them, waiting like vultures. Someone had tipped them off. Microphones were shoved in his face. "Darius, did you do it? Did you hack the state's court system? Are you working with a criminal network?" The headlines started before he was even in the squad car. "Teenage black hacker taken down in sting operation." Grandson of war veteran accused of statewide security breach. Another black youth turned criminal. Darius could barely hear the questions, could barely see the lights. All he could hear was Walter's voice, shouting his name, and deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The world has a way of turning its back on you the moment they think they've figured you out. And by the time Darius Bennett arrived at the Jackson County Detention Center, the world had already made up its mind. He wasn't a kid anymore. He wasn't a student. He wasn't a grandson. He was a threat. And when they see you as a threat, they stop looking for the truth. The headlines were relentless. Every station, every paper, every online blog had something to say about the teen hacker who compromised state security. They plastered his face on television screens across Kansas City like he was some kind of terrorist. They used words like dangerous, mastermind, radicalized youth. Nobody bothered to ask why he did what he did. Nobody cared about Leonard Moore. Nobody cared that maybe, just maybe, Darius wasn't the villain they painted him to be. And standing in front of all that noise, soaking it all in like it was fuel for his ego, was Judge Clarence Whitaker. 20 years on the bench had taught Whitaker one thing. It wasn't about justice. It was about control. And no 101 was going to make him look like a fool in his own courtroom. Not some quiet, awkward, fatherless black boy from a neighborhood Whitaker had spent his entire career pretending didn't exist. Not some teenager who had the nerve to embarrass the state. And definitely not someone who thought they could outsmart him. When Darius was brought back into the courtroom for his first official hearing, the energy in the room was different. Colder, sharper. Reporters filled the gallery again, their pens ready to catch every word. The prosecution sat tall and smug, like they'd already won. And Judge Whitaker? He looked like a man ready to make an example out of somebody. Walter Bennett sat in the front row again, his face tight with fear and frustration. He hadn't been able to sleep for days. He'd spent every waking hour trying to find a lawyer, anyone who would take Darius's case. But no one wanted to touch it, not after the media circus, not after the state started whispering words like national security breach. So there Walter sat, alone, the only family Darius had left in that room. And then the show began. Judge Whitaker leaned back in his chair like he had all the time in the world. His fingers tapped lazily on the gavel. And with that same smug little grin, he nodded toward the prosecutor. "Mr. Price," Whitaker drawled, "you may proceed." District Attorney Morgan Price stood with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who already knew the ending to this story. He adjusted his tie, stepped toward the jury, and turned to face the gallery like he was performing on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich with false concern, "we are here today to confront a danger far greater than any of us expected. A young man, just 17, who didn't simply play with computers, but who deliberately infiltrated the Missouri state judicial system." The lights in the courtroom dimmed as a large monitor flickered to life behind him. Grainy images filled the screen, lines of code, a login window, a timestamp showing unauthorized access. Price pointed to the screen like he was revealing the smoking gun. "This," he announced, "is a direct capture from the defendant's personal laptop, showing him hacking into restricted government databases, breaking federal law, compromising legal records." He paused just long enough to let the weight of his words settle over the room like a heavy fog. "And yet," Price added with a mocking smirk, "the defense would have you believe this young man was helping the system." A few quiet chuckles echoed through the gallery. Darius sat motionless, eyes forward, jaw clenched. Judge Whitaker leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the bench, his grin widening. "What a waste!" Whitaker mused, shaking his head with mock disappointment. "A smart boy like you could have done something useful with your life. Instead, here we are." The room buzzed with low murmurs. You could feel the air tightening around Darius like a noose. But Darius didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't move. He let them have their moment, let them think they had him right where they wanted him, because deep down, Darius knew something none of them understood yet. He wasn't finished. He waited, just long enough for the room to settle. And then, for the second time, he raised his head. Steady, focused, and with a voice as calm as ever, he spoke. "Your Honor," Darius said, cutting through the noise like a blade, "if you're done putting on a show, I'd like permission to present evidence that will prove not only my innocence, but the corruption in this courtroom." The room stopped, dead silent. You could feel it shift again, like the ground had cracked just a little beneath their feet. Price stiffened. Judge Whitaker's grin faltered. Even a few jurors exchanged glances, unsure what to make of what they'd just heard. Walter held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. And in that moment, Darius Bennett took control of the room. He reached into the bag beside him slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the very thing they all feared most, his laptop. He placed it on the defense table, flipped it open, and connected it to the courtroom display system. The screen lit up. The hum of electricity filled the air. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the real fight was about to start. You could hear the tension crackle in the courtroom like static in the air. All eyes locked on Darius as he adjusted the screen, his hands steady, his breathing controlled. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He moved like a surgeon preparing for the most important operation of his life. And in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Walter leaned forward on the edge of his seat, clutching the back of the pew in front of him, afraid to even breathe. For the first time in weeks, his grandson didn't look like a kid backed into a corner. He looked like a man with a mission. And the room felt it, even Judge Whitaker. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat like he was trying to shake off the feeling that control was slipping through his fingers. "Proceed," Whitaker snapped, trying to sound in charge. But that edge of confidence, it wasn't there anymore. Darius didn't say a word at first. He just clicked play. The courtroom lights dimmed again, and on the massive screen behind him, the security footage from Leonard Moore's case flickered to life. Everyone in the room recognized it. The same grainy video that had been played on the news, in court, in every briefing about Moore's so-called guilt. The timestamp at the bottom read 8:17 p.m. A man in a ski mask and a dark hoodie walked into the convenience store. He pointed a gun at the cashier. He grabbed cash from the register. He ran out. It all played exactly the way the prosecution had told it. Morgan Price folded his arms and leaned back, wearing that same smug expression as if to say, "We've all seen this already, kid." But Darius wasn't finished. He cleared his throat, his voice calm, controlled, and precise. "This is the footage used to convict Leonard Moore," Darius explained. "The prosecution claims it's authentic, but what they didn't show you is this." He tapped another key. The screen split in two. On the left, the footage they'd all seen. On the right, the same video. Same camera angle. Same man. Same movements, but a different timestamp. 8:12 p.m. A wave of whispers rushed through the courtroom. Judge Whitaker's mouth twitched. Morgan Price leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Darius kept going. "What no one checked," Darius continued, "is the metadata embedded in the footage files. Every digital video has a creation log details that reveal when the footage was recorded, when it was edited, and who accessed it." He pulled up lines of raw code columns of numbers and data only a handful of people in that room could even begin to understand. But Darius wasn't showing off. He was building something. A case. A trap. He highlighted one section of code, zooming in so everyone could see. "This is the original log from the video file used to convict Leonard Moore," Darius said. "And right here is the edit history. The timestamp wasn't just changed once, it was changed 3 times. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jurors shifted in their seats. Reporters leaned in, scribbling furiously. Darius zoomed in again, his finger pointing at one specific line of code. And here's the user ID, the person who authorized those changes. The screen flickered, and there it was. In big bold letters. M. Price. You could have heard a pin drop. Walter let out a breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding. The entire gallery erupted into chaos, people shouting, reporters jumping to their feet, jurors looking around in confusion. Even Judge Whitaker slammed his gavel down hard, over and over again, trying to restore order. But it was too late. Darius stood up from the defense table, turned toward the gallery, and for the first time, raised his voice. "This man," Darius shouted, pointing directly at Morgan Price, "tampered with evidence to send an innocent man to prison, and this court was ready to let it happen again." Morgan Price stood frozen, his face drained of color. Judge Whitaker tried to regain control. "Mr. Bennett, that's enough," he barked. But Darius wasn't finished. He turned to face the judge, head held high, eyes burning with something nobody had seen in him until now: power. "I'm not the criminal here, Your Honor," Darius said, his voice sharp as a knife. "But I can show you exactly who is." And just like that, he hit one final key. The courtroom screen shifted again. This time, it wasn't code, it was video. Clear, high definition. Security footage from the district attorney's own office. Morgan Price, sitting at his computer, opening the Moore case file, typing in the new timestamps, saving the changes. Undeniable. Unforgivable. The crowd exploded again. "Order! Order!" Judge Whitaker roared, pounding his gavel so hard it cracked. But the room wasn't listening anymore. Walter stood up, shouting over the noise. "You see! My grandson was telling the truth!" Darius turned back to face the judge one last time, his voice steady, but low, cutting through the chaos like a whisper everyone could hear. "So, Your Honor, what do you have to say for yourself?" Judge Whitaker sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if his mind couldn't process what had just happened. And for the first time, the man who had mocked Darius Bennett had nothing to say. When the truth finally hit that courtroom like a freight train, it didn't just rattle the walls, it shook the entire foundation of the so-called justice system. For 20 long years, Judge Clarence Whitaker sat in that seat, wielding power like a weapon. He had humiliated more black and brown defendants than anyone could count, treating their lives like they were just names on a list waiting to be erased. And now, here he was, frozen, cornered, exposed. You could practically feel the fear creeping up his spine as the footage looped again on the giant screen. There was no denying it now. The man who had been standing in front of that jury with his chest puffed out like he owned the truth, Morgan Price. The assistant district attorney had been caught red-handed, caught tampering with evidence, caught framing an innocent man. Darius had done the impossible. He had flipped the script right in front of everyone. And the courtroom? It was pure chaos. Jurors whispered to each other, their faces pale. Reporters stood on their toes, holding microphones toward the front of the room like they couldn't decide who to cover first. The crowd in the gallery was buzzing, some in shock, some in outrage, and some like Walter fighting back tears of pure, raw pride. Morgan Price didn't move. He just stood there, his hands shaking at his sides, his lips pressed into a tight line like he was trying to figure out how it had all gone so wrong. His eyes darted to Judge Whitaker, looking for a signal, a lifeline, anything. But Whitaker? He was too busy drowning in his own silence. He opened his mouth like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. Not a word. Not a sound. Because deep down he knew no one in that room was listening to him anymore. Darius didn't stop there. He leaned forward, planting his hands on the defense table, and locked eyes with Morgan Price. "You knew," Darius said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You knew Moore was innocent, and you sent him to prison anyway." Morgan flinched like the words had physically hit him. Darius turned to the jury, to the reporters, to the crowd. "And you all let it happen." For a second, the room stood still again, and then Walter rose to his feet. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't care about court rules anymore. He stepped forward, his voice shaking but fierce. "My grandson is not a criminal," Walter shouted, loud enough for every soul in that building to hear. "He's been fighting for the truth since the beginning. He's been fighting for all of us." The gallery broke into applause, loud, raw, and uncontrollable. Whitaker slammed his gavel again and again. "Order, I said order in this courtroom." But it didn't matter. No one was listening to him anymore. Morgan Price, red-faced and sweating, finally snapped. He pointed a shaking finger at Darius. "He broke the law," Morgan roared. "He hacked a government system. You all saw the proof." But his words fell flat, because now everyone knew the truth. Darius leaned back, folding his arms like he had all the time in the world. "Yeah?" he replied calmly. "And you framed a man for something he didn't do. Which one of us really belongs in that chair?" Morgan's mouth twisted like he wanted to respond, but he couldn't, because Darius was right, and they all knew it. Suddenly, the back doors of the courtroom swung open. 2 federal agents in dark suits stepped inside, moving with quiet authority. One of them pulled out a badge, holding it high. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," the agent announced, his voice sharp and commanding. "We are here to take Assistant District Attorney Morgan Price into federal custody for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy." The room exploded again. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Jurors looked like they'd just been hit by a tidal wave. "And Morgan Price?" He collapsed into his chair, his face crumbling as the agents approached. Walter covered his mouth with his hands, overcome with emotion. Darius watched silently as the agents cuffed Morgan and led him toward the exit. No one clapped, no one cheered, because this wasn't victory. Not yet. Judge Whitaker, now ghost white, tried to regain what little control he had left. "This court is adjourned until further notice," Whitaker muttered, his voice cracking as he stood up and hurried toward his chambers like a man fleeing a sinking ship. But as he reached for the door, Darius called out one last time. "You're next," Darius said quietly, but loud enough for Whitaker to hear. Whitaker paused us back to the room, his hand frozen on the door handle. He didn't turn around. He didn't respond. He just stood there, silent, defeated, and then, without another word, he slipped out of sight. Darius exhaled slowly, his body finally relaxing after what felt like a lifetime of holding it all in. He turned toward Walter, who rushed forward, and wrapped his arms around his grandson so tight it felt like he'd never let go. "You did it, son!" Walter whispered, his voice shaking with pride. "You did it!" But Darius knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. As the gallery slowly emptied, and reporters swarmed the federal agents hauling Morgan Price away, Darius caught the eye of one of the agents still standing at the back of the courtroom. The man nodded once, just a small gesture, but one that felt like a warning. And deep down, Darius knew something bigger was still coming, and he had no idea how far they'd go to stop him next. Darius should have felt relief when the agents walked Morgan Price out of that courtroom in handcuffs. After all, wasn't that the goal? Wasn't that the moment they had all been waiting for? Exposing the corruption, proving the truth, clearing Leonard Moore's name. It should have been over. But the moment Morgan disappeared behind those courtroom doors, Darius felt something else. A weight, heavier than before, like the fight had only just begun. Walter must have felt it too. He squeezed Darius's shoulder and leaned in, whispering in his ear, "Stay sharp, son. This ain't over." Darius nodded, but before he could even process what was next, the courtroom doors flew open again. This time, 2 new men stepped inside. Not local cops, not court security, but men in sharp, dark suits with government issue written all over them. The taller one pulled out a badge. Special Agent Daniel Reeves, Homeland Security. He announced loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "By order of the United States government, Darius Bennett, you are under arrest for unauthorized access to federal databases and violation of national security protocols." The air drained from the room in an instant. Walter froze. Darius's breath caught in his throat. The crowd, still buzzing from Morgan Price's arrest, fell into a stunned silence. "No," Walter whispered, shaking his head as he stepped between Darius and the agents. "No, you don't get to do this. You just saw what he exposed. He's not a criminal, he's a hero." But the agents didn't flinch. Reeves took a step forward, his voice lower now but no less dangerous. "This isn't about corruption anymore. This is about federal security. Step aside, sir." Walter's hands clenched into fists, his body shaking with rage. But one look at the weapons strapped to the agent's sides, and he knew he didn't stand a chance. Darius stood slowly, his legs trembling, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through his chest. He held his hands out in front of him, trying to stop the shaking. "Wait, just wait," Darius stammered. "I can explain." But he didn't get the chance. Reeves grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back, as another agent snapped cold metal cuffs around his wrists. Darius winced but didn't resist. What was the point? No one here was listening. Walter lunged forward again, but Reeves pushed him back with one hand. "I said stand down," Reeves barked. Walter's face twisted in frustration and helplessness. And then, the worst sound of all. The gasps. The murmurs. The whispering that started to ripple through the gallery again. The same people who had just watched Darius expose a dirty prosecutor were already turning on him. The same media who had just praised his bravery were already sharpening their headlines. He could hear them. Federal charges? National security threat? Maybe he was working with someone. They didn't care about the truth. Not anymore. And just when Darius thought it couldn't get any worse, the doors slammed open again. A sharp crack shattered the air like a gunshot. For a second, the entire courtroom froze. And then, the screaming started. Another shot rang out closer this time. Chairs scraped across the floor as people dove for cover. Jurors hit the ground, reporters ducked behind their cameras, and the gallery erupted into chaos. Reeves grabbed Darius, pulling him down behind the defense table. "Get down!" Reeves shouted. "Stay down!" But Darius couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. All he could hear was the ringing in his ears and the sound of gunfire tearing through the air. Someone was shooting, and they were aiming for him. Reeves yanked Darius to his feet, dragging him toward the judge's private exit. "Move, now!" Walter scrambled after them, his face pale with terror. They shoved through the door just as another shot slammed into the wood behind them, sending splinters flying. Darius stumbled into the hallway, his chest heaving, his mind spinning. Reeves slammed the door shut, locking it behind them. For a second, they stood in the dimly lit corridor, the chaos muffled behind thick walls. Darius turned to face Reeves, his voice shaking with fear and anger. "Who are you? Why are you really here?" Reeves didn't answer right away. He glanced down the hallway, making sure they were alone. And then, he leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "You don't get it, do you?" Reeves muttered. Darius shook his head. "Get what?" Reeves took a deep breath, his jaw clenched tight. "They don't just want you in prison, kid. They want you gone." The words hit Darius like a punch to the chest. Walter grabbed Darius's arm, pulling him closer. "What the hell is he talking about?" Reeves glanced back toward the door, the tension in his body tightening like a coiled spring. "They were never going to let you walk out of here alive," Reeves said quietly. "Not after what you just exposed. You humiliated the wrong people." Darius's throat went dry. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Reeves leaned in even closer, his voice deadly serious. "You're not safe here. You're not safe anywhere." Darius felt the floor drop out from under him. All this time, he thought the courtroom was the battlefield. He thought the system was his enemy. But now, he realized something far more terrifying. The real fight had only just begun. Everything after that was a blur. One minute, Darius was standing in front of the whole world, exposing the truth. The next, he was running for his life. Running like every breath might be his last. Running like every step could be the one that finally took him down. Reeves kept a tight grip on his arm, dragging him down the dark service hallway behind the courtroom. Walter was right behind them, gasping for air, his old legs pushing harder than they probably had in years. None of them dared to look back. They didn't have to. The gunfire behind them told them everything they needed to know. Someone had come to finish the job. And Darius knew deep down this was never about justice. This was never about the law. It was about silencing him before the truth spread any further. Reeves shoved open a side exit, leading them into a dimly lit stairwell. "Keep moving," Reeves ordered, his voice low but urgent. Darius's legs burned as they pounded down the steps. Walter stumbled once, nearly falling, but Darius grabbed his arm, steadying him without breaking stride. They burst out of the stairwell into the underground parking garage beneath the courthouse. It was nearly empty, just a few dim lights flickering overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. That's when Darius saw them. Two black SUVs, engines running, men in tactical gear standing by the doors, earpieces in place, guns holstered but ready. Reeves cursed under his breath. Darius didn't need anyone to explain. Those men weren't here to arrest him. They were here to erase him. Reeves spun around, shoving Darius and Walter toward the far end of the garage. "Go!" he hissed. "Run!" Gunfire erupted behind them. Walter grabbed Darius's hand, and they ran faster than Darius ever thought they could. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete walls, spraying dust and debris into the air. Reeves returned fire, covering their escape, shouting orders into his radio. But Darius knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of time. They ducked behind a concrete pillar, Darius's heart pounding so loud it felt like it might explode in his chest. Walter leaned against the wall, clutching his side, struggling to catch his breath. We're not gonna make it," Walter gasped. Darius shook his head, refusing to give up. "We can't stop now," Darius whispered, scanning the garage for any way out. That's when he saw it. A door, 50 feet away, marked Maintenance Exit. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Come on!" Darius shouted, grabbing Walter's arm again. They sprinted for the door, weaving between parked cars, ducking low to avoid the gunfire still echoing through the garage. Reeves followed, laying down cover fire as he moved. They reached the door, and Darius slammed his shoulder into it, busting it open. They stumbled into a narrow alley behind the courthouse. For a split second, everything went quiet. Darius turned to Reeves. "What now?" Reeves scanned the alley, his face tight with frustration. "They'll have the whole block locked down in minutes," Reeves muttered. "We can't go back to the street." Walter doubled over, coughing hard, his face pale. Darius grabbed Reeves by the arm, desperation in his voice. "Then where?" Reeves didn't answer right away. He pulled out his phone, typing something fast, then looked up, locking eyes with Darius. "There's a safe house a few blocks from here," Reeves said. "But we have to move now." They took off again, cutting through side streets and alleys, sticking to the shadows. Every step felt heavier than the last. Every corner they turned felt like it might be the one that ended it all. Darius's mind raced just as fast as his feet. Who were these people? Who sent them? How deep did this go? And more importantly, how the hell were they going to stop it? They reached the edge of a rundown neighborhood, abandoned buildings, boarded-up windows, cracked sidewalks. Reeves led them to a small, rusted door tucked between two crumbling brick walls. He punched in a code on a hidden keypad, and the door clicked open. They slipped inside. Darius collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. Walter dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Reeves locked the door behind them, double-checking every bolt and latch. For a moment, they were safe. But the silence didn't last long. Darius stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This is insane," Darius muttered. "I thought we won. I thought exposing Morgan Price would be enough." Reeves leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "You embarrassed them," Reeves said quietly. "You pulled back the curtain and showed the whole city what they didn't want anyone to see." Darius turned to face him, his fists clenched. "So why are they still coming after me? Why not just let it go?" Reeves let out a bitter laugh. "Because you didn't just expose a dirty DA," Reeves explained. "You lit a match that could burn down everything they built. And the people who built that system? They don't lose, not without a fight." Darius felt the weight of those words sink deep into his chest. "So what? I just keep running forever?" Darius asked, his voice cracking with frustration. Reeves shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You fight smarter." Darius frowned. "What does that even mean?" Reeves pulled out his phone again, showing Darius the screen. "This," Reeves said. "You still have the data, the code, the evidence that proves how far this goes. You get it out. You let the whole world see it." Darius stared at the screen, his mind spinning. He thought about everything they had lost, everything they had risked, everything still left to fight for, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. They weren't going to silence him. Not now. Not ever. Darius had always believed information was power. But standing there in that crumbling safe house, breathing in dust and sweat, he realized something far more terrifying. Power always comes with a price, and right now, that price was his life. He stared at the cheap burner phone in Reeves's hand like it was a ticking bomb. Somewhere on the other end of that connection, someone much bigger than Morgan Price had already decided Darius Bennett was too dangerous to keep breathing. And if they weren't going to stop hunting him now, there was only one card left to play go public. Walter sat slumped in a broken chair by the window, catching his breath, looking more worn down than Darius had ever seen him. Yet, his eyes stayed sharp, watching, listening, ready. That's the thing about a man who's survived more battles than most people can count, knows when the real fight's about to begin. Walter could feel it coming like a storm rolling in, and so could Darius. Reeves slid the phone across the table toward him. "You sure you want to do this, kid?" he asked, his voice lower now, not as sharp, almost concerned. Darius didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air like smoke. Was he sure? Number. But being scared wasn't an option anymore. He nodded. I have to, Darius finally said. I can't keep running. Reeves nodded slowly, like he already knew that would be the answer. All right, Reeves said, standing and stretching his shoulders like the weight of the whole mess had settled on his back. If you're gonna do this, you've got one shot. One clean shot to get it out before they shut you down for good. Darius swallowed hard, staring down at the phone like it might bite him. What do you mean shut me down? Darius asked quietly. Reeves leaned against the table, crossing his arms. You think those men back there were the last ones they're sending? You think this city's gonna let you walk into a news station and broadcast this live on air? They'll pull the plug before you even finish your first sentence. Darius felt his throat tighten. So what? We just give up? Reeves shook his head. Not give up. Go bigger. Go somewhere they can't control. Somewhere public. Somewhere loud. Walter finally stood up, his voice rough from exhaustion but steady as a rock. City Hall, Walter said, looking between them. Front steps. Middle of the damn day. You stand in front of every camera you can find, and you make them hear you. Darius turned to his grandfather, wide-eyed. You really think that'll work? Walter took a slow breath, resting a hand on Darius's shoulder. I don't know, Walter admitted. But it's the only way you walk away with the truth still alive. Darius felt a chill run down his spine. City Hall. Public. Risky. Exposed. It was suicide or salvation, and he knew there was no in-between. Reeves pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. Everything you found, everything they tried to hide, it's all here, Reeves said. But once you go out there with this, you better be ready to finish what you started. Darius picked up the drive, gripping it tight in his fist. His whole body felt like it was shaking from the inside out. He glanced at Walter, then back at Reeves. I'm ready, Darius whispered. Reeves nodded once. Then let's move. The next few hours moved like lightning and molasses at the same time. Fast but heavy. Every second felt like a countdown to something none of them could fully see. They moved through back alleys, ducking security cameras, switching cars twice to avoid being followed. Reeves had contacts people who owed him, favors people who could stall the city's surveillance long enough for them to make it to the steps of City Hall. By the time they arrived, the plaza was already filling up with the morning crowd, tourists snapping pictures, city workers heading inside, a few local news vans setting up for another typical day of political coverage. They had no idea what was coming. Darius could barely hear his own thoughts over the pounding in his chest. Walter stood next to him, steadying him with a firm hand on his back. Reeves stayed behind, scanning the crowd, watching every move like a hawk. Darius stepped forward, his legs trembling, but his voice growing stronger with every breath. He pulled the flash drive from his pocket, holding it up high, and then he started to speak. At first, only a few people noticed. Then the cameras turned. The reporters rushed forward. Microphones pushed toward his face. Darius didn't stop. He told them everything. How Leonard Moore was framed. How the prosecution doctored evidence. How the system wasn't broken, it was rigged. And how they had tried to kill him to keep it buried. The crowd grew. The murmurs turned into gasps. Phones came out. Live streams started. And for the first time, Darius owned the narrative. He plugged the flash drive into a reporter's laptop, showing the entire city, the entire world, the files, the videos, the proof, the truth. And just when he thought they might actually pull this off, that's when he saw them. Across the plaza, black SUVs. Again, engines running, men in suits stepping out. Darius's voice faltered for just a second. Walter grabbed his arm. Keep going, son, he whispered. Don't stop. Not now. And Darius didn't. He kept speaking, kept showing, kept fighting. Because no matter what happened next, they couldn't unsee the truth now. It was out, and there was no going back. Darius thought getting the truth out would be the end of it. He thought standing on those steps, holding nothing back in front of the cameras, would be the moment everything changed. And for a second, it felt like it had. People in the crowd were shouting. Some were crying. Reporters were scrambling to push the footage live. Phones were blowing up with live streams, showing the world the files Darius had held in his hands for weeks. But that second didn't last. Because as soon as the footage hit the air, the signal cut out. Every reporter's feed, gone. Every phone streaming, frozen. The screens went black just for a moment, but long enough for Darius to know something wasn't right. He turned toward the reporter who had plugged in his flash drive. She looked down at her laptop, panic flashing across her face as lines of code flooded the screen. No hat's happening, she whispered, frantically hitting keys. Reeves moved in fast, leaning over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. They're shutting us down, Reeves muttered. They're wiping the connection. Darius' heart dropped. How? How could they move that fast? Reeves grabbed the laptop, pulling it free from the broadcast setup. We have to go. Walter pulled Darius back, his voice tense. Son, what's happening? Darius didn't even know how to explain it, but he could feel it like the floor was giving out beneath him. The flash drive, the files, the backup streams, they were being erased. He could see the lines of code scrambling across the reporter's screen. The data wasn't just getting blocked, it was getting destroyed. His work, his proof, everything, being ripped apart by someone faster, smarter, and already inside. Reeves grabbed Darius by the collar. They're here. Darius spun around just in time to see two black SUVs roll to a stop at the edge of the plaza. Doors flew open. Men in black tactical gear stepped out, moving fast, too fast. They weren't there to arrest him. They weren't holding badges. They were here to clean up. Reeves shoved Darius toward Walter. Go! Get him out of here! Walter's face twisted in panic. We can't outrun them. Reeves pulled out his sidearm, checking the chamber. Doesn't matter. You run anyway. Gunfire erupted. Crowds screamed and scattered in every direction. People dove behind cars, overturned tables, anything they could find for cover. Darius ducked low, pulling Walter with him as bullets tore through the air. Reeves stayed behind, laying down cover fire as Darius and Walter sprinted toward the nearest alley. They didn't stop, not when Walter stumbled, not when Darius's legs burned like fire, not when the city behind them turned into a war zone. They ran, street after street, corner after corner. But Darius knew they weren't just being chased on the ground, they were being hunted online too. Whoever was behind that cyber attack had already gotten inside his files. If they had that kind of access, they could trace him anywhere, track every move he made. They were already erasing him from the inside out. Walter pulled Darius into a rundown diner 2 blocks away, ducking behind the counter. The old man behind the register ducked too, his hands trembling as he watched the chaos spill into the streets outside. Darius slammed his fist on the floor, breathing hard. I have to stop them, he gasped. I have to fight back. Walter grabbed his face, forcing Darius to look at him. How, son? How do you fight something you can't see? Darius's mind raced. His breathing quickened. Think. He closed his eyes, remembering the systems he'd built, the defenses he'd designed. If they were in his network, there had to be a way to flush them out, a way to isolate their attack, a way to trap them. But he couldn't do it from here. He needed real equipment. A secure connection. He needed a way back in. Darius looked up at Walter. There's a place, Darius whispered. I used to go there when I was a kid. A server farm abandoned now. I can work from there. They won't be able to shut me down. Walter nodded without hesitation. Then that's where we're going. Darius turned to the diner owner. Do you have a car? Darius asked, desperation cracking in his voice. The man nodded, his face pale, but his keys already in his hand. Out back. They didn't waste a second. Walter and Darius bolted through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the narrow alley where an old Chevy sat waiting. The diner owner tossed Darius the keys. Good luck, kid, the man whispered. Darius and Walter climbed in, slamming the doors shut. Walter started the engine, tires screeching as they peeled out into the street. Darius pulled out the flash drive again, staring at it like it was the last bullet in a losing war. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. This was about surviving long enough to end this once and for all. And as the city of Kansas City burned behind them, Darius Bennett made a promise to himself, no matter what it cost, no matter what it took, he was going to fight back. And this time, he wasn't going to lose. Darius had never felt time moving like this before, fast and slow at the same time. The old Chevy rattled as Walter pushed it harder than any car that age had a right to go. Every bump in the road felt like it shook loose another piece of Darius's sanity. Every turn felt like it could be the last. Walter gripped the wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white, his eyes darting from the rearview mirror to the road ahead. Tell me again what this place is, Walter shouted over the roar of the engine. Darius swallowed hard, clutching the flash drive like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. "It used to be a backup server farm," Darius explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "Old internet company shut it down a few years ago. No one's touched it since. But the hardware's still there, and it's off the grid." Walter nodded, his jaw clenching. Sounds like the kind of place they won't expect. Darius wasn't sure if that was true, but at this point, it was all they had left. They hit the city limits and headed south, away from the lights, away from the noise. Kansas City faded behind them like a bad dream they couldn't wake up from. By the time they reached the outskirts, the roads had gone quiet. No cars, no patrols, just empty streets and dark fields stretching for miles. Darius felt the tension in his chest loosen just a little. Maybe they'd bought themselves some time. The server farm sat at the end of a cracked asphalt road, surrounded by rusted fencing and a padlocked gate that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Walter killed the engine. The silence felt heavy. Darius climbed out first, his shoes crunching on broken gravel as he approached the gate. Walter followed close behind. Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out an old key, something he'd kept since the last time he'd visited the place as a kid. The lock popped open with a rusty snap. They slipped through the gate and made their way to the back door of the building. Darius punched in the old entry code, surprised it still worked. The door creaked open. Cold air and dust hit them like a wall. The place smelled like old wires and forgotten tech. Rows of dark server racks stretched out in front of them like the skeleton of a machine that used to breathe. Darius moved fast. He knew this place like the back of his hand. He found the backup generator, flipped the switch, and the hum of power filled the room. Lights flickered, fans kicked on. The servers were alive, barely but alive. Walter stood near the door, keeping watch as Darius fired up the main terminal. His fingers moved across the keyboard like they had a mind of their own. Lines of code flooded the screen. He wasn't connected to the public internet. That was the key. No outside traffic. No way for anyone to wipe him out remotely. He was in control. Or, so he thought. Darius accessed his secure storage. Or tried to. Access denied. Darius frowned, typing faster. Again. Access denied. His stomach dropped. Someone had already reached his off-site backups. He ran diagnostics, ran tracing protocols, and there it was. They were still inside. Walter paced behind him, glancing back toward the door every few seconds. "What's wrong?" Walter asked, his voice low, tense. Darius didn't want to answer. He didn't want to admit what he already knew. They're erasing everything," Darius whispered. "Every backup, every file, every trace." Walter leaned over his shoulder, gripping the back of Darius's chair. "Can you stop them?" Darius's jaw clenched. "I don't know." But he had to try. He launched a countermeasure, something he'd built months ago but never tested. A digital dead man's switch. If someone tried to wipe him out, it would lock down his data and reroute copies to secure nodes hidden all over the deep web. It was risky. It wasn't perfect, but it was all he had left. He hit execute. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screen flickered. The system locked down, and for the first time in hours, Darius smiled. He had them, until the terminal went black. Darius froze. No. A new message appeared. "We see you." Darius' heart stopped. Walter leaned in closer. "What the hell is that?" Darius stared at the screen, his pulse racing. "They're here." A second message appeared. "Walk away or we finish what we started." Darius's hands hovered over the keyboard, his breath coming faster. He knew that wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And then, the lights cut out. The server hum died. The power went dead. Walter grabbed Darius by the arm. "We have to move." Darius didn't argue. They bolted for the door, back into the night, the air thick with tension. Because now, they weren't just fighting for the truth. They were fighting for their lives. Darius Bennett had run out of places to hide. The safe house was burned. The server farm was dark. The files were slipping through his fingers faster than he could hold them. And still, they kept coming. He and Walter stood in the middle of that empty field just beyond the dead server building, their breath hanging in the cold night air. It was so quiet it almost didn't feel real. But Darius knew better. This wasn't silence. It was the calm before the storm. Walter looked over at him, his voice strained but steady. "Son, you gotta tell me what's next," Walter said, his hands shaking not from fear, but from readiness. "Because I swear to God, I'll go down swinging if that's what it takes." Darius wanted to tell him there was a way out, that they could just walk away, that maybe they could disappear, but they both knew that wasn't true. Darius rubbed his face, his mind racing. They'd already lost the footage. They'd already lost control of the narrative. But there was one thing they hadn't lost. The people who had seen him on the courthouse steps, the people who had heard the truth before the signal was cut, the people who were still watching waiting. Darius turned toward Walter, his voice shaking but full of something neither of them had felt in hours: resolve. "We go back," Darius whispered. "One more time." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Back where?" Darius squared his shoulders, gripping the flash drive so tight his knuckles turned white. "City Hall," Darius said. "Front steps, but this time we do it live." Walter shook his head. "They already killed the broadcast." Darius nodded. "I know. But I'm not talking about the media." Walter squinted, trying to read the look on Darius's face. "You're not making sense, son." Darius took a deep breath. "We go to the people. Direct. No networks. No middlemen. Every phone in that crowd, every person streaming live on their own channels, their own accounts. Thousands of them. They can't shut us all down." Walter stared at him for a long moment, and then he smiled. "For a quiet kid, you sure know how to make a lot of noise," Walter whispered. Darius cracked a small, exhausted grin. "Let's go make some noise." They made it back to the city just as the first light of morning broke over the horizon. The streets were tense, cops on every corner, barricades still up. The news trucks had pulled back. But the crowd had grown. People had seen the streams. They had heard the rumors. They had come back, more of them than before. By the time Darius and Walter stepped onto the plaza, there had to be over 1,000 people waiting. Not just reporters, not just activists, but regular people, parents, veterans, teenagers, teachers, people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And this time, Darius didn't walk to the podium. He didn't go to the press. He walked straight into the crowd. He held up his phone, held up the flash drive, and turned on his own live stream. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't wait for someone to hand him a microphone. He spoke. "My name is Darius Bennett," he began, his voice shaking but growing louder with every word. "And they've been trying to shut me up since the second I spoke the truth." The crowd pressed in closer, phones held high, recording every second. "They shut down the news. They wiped my files. They tried to kill me, but they forgot one thing." He turned slowly, looking at every face around him. "They can't silence all of us." Cheers erupted, drowning out the hum of the city. Darius lifted the flash drive again. "This is the evidence they don't want you to see. Evidence that proves the system is rigged, that they framed innocent people, that they will do anything to keep their power." People started shouting, chanting his name, fists in the air, but Darius didn't stop. "I've already lost everything trying to bring this to light," Darius continued. "But if you're watching this right now, if you care about the truth, don't let it end here. Take this story, spread it. Flood every feed, every platform, every screen you can find. Don't let them bury this." The plaza roared. Walter stood back, watching his grandson not as a scared boy but as a leader. And just when it felt like they might finally win, the black SUVs rolled in. Again, dozens of them, heavily armed men in tactical gear, stepped out, surrounding the plaza. The crowd started to panic, but Darius raised his hand, shouting over the noise. "Don't stop streaming," he yelled. "They want us scared. Don't give it to them." The people listened. Phones stayed up. Streams kept rolling. Thousands of feeds flooding the internet. The lead agent stepped forward, shouting into a bullhorn. "Darius Bennett, surrender immediately or we will use force." Darius stood his ground. Walter moved in beside him. And one by one, people from the crowd stepped forward, surrounding Darius and Walter. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. A human shield. Arms locked. Voices rising. Chanting as one. "You can't silence us." The agents hesitated, because for the first time, it wasn't just Darius standing alone. It was all of them, and Darius knew right then and there. Win or lose, this fight had already become bigger than him. It only takes a spark to start a wildfire. And right there, on the steps of Kansas City's City Hall, Darius Bennett had lit the biggest fire the city had ever seen. For weeks, they had painted him as a criminal. For weeks, they had tried to erase him. But now, there were too many eyes watching, too many voices rising, too many people standing with him. And the system? It had finally cracked. The agents surrounded the plaza, weapons drawn, ready to move in. But something had changed. It wasn't just Darius and Walter anymore. It was hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder, locking arms, refusing to move. And behind those people, thousands more, watching on their phones, on their computers, on every live feed flooding the internet. You could feel the hesitation in the air. The agents had the firepower, they had the authority, but for the first time, they didn't have control. Darius could see it on their faces. Uncertainty. Fear. Not fear of him, but fear of all of them. Fear of what would happen if they pulled the trigger this time. Walter leaned in close, keeping his voice low. "Hold your ground, son. They make the next move, not us." Darius nodded, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst. And then, the unthinkable happened. The agents backed off. One by one, they lowered their weapons. The lead agent barked something into his radio, his face twisted in frustration. Then, without another word, they turned and walked away. The plaza erupted in cheers, so loud it shook the ground. Darius stood frozen, barely able to process what had just happened. Walter grabbed him by the shoulders, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You did it," Walter whispered, his voice cracking. "We did it." But Darius knew this wasn't over. Not yet, because the fallout was only just beginning. Within hours, headlines spread like wildfire. City Hall showdown goes viral. Hundreds rally behind Darius Bennett. Systemic corruption exposed city officials under investigation. By the end of the day, the governor of Missouri had no choice but to order a full federal review of Jackson County's justice system. Judge Clarence Whitaker Ronce, untouchable, was officially removed from the bench. His record of biased rulings and misconduct had been swept under the rug for years. But now, it was all out in the open. Morgan Price, the disgraced assistant district attorney, faced federal charges for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. His face, once plastered across political campaign posters, now filled every news station as the face of the city's deepest betrayal. And then, the moment that truly broke the city's heart, Leonard Moore, the man Darius had fought so hard for, walked out of prison a free man. It was early morning when the gates of the Fulton County Correctional Facility finally opened. Cameras lined the sidewalk. Reporters waited with microphones in hand, but none of them mattered. Darius stood in the crowd, holding Walter's hand tight, barely breathing as Leonard stepped through the gates. For a moment, Leonard just stood there, frozen, staring at the faces in the crowd like he couldn't believe this was real. And then, he saw Darius. The man's face crumbled, not in defeat, but in relief. In gratitude, he walked straight toward Darius, pushing past reporters and cameras, until they stood face to face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. And then, Leonard broke down. He wrapped Darius in a hug so tight it felt like the air left both of their lungs. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered two words that shook Darius to his core. "Thank you." Darius didn't know what to say. He just held on tighter, because in that moment, every sleepless night, every step he had taken, every risk he had faced, it had all been worth it. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling in his gut, because even as the city celebrated, even as people called him a hero, Darius knew the people who really ran things weren't done yet. Late that night, as Walter locked the doors of their tiny apartment, Darius stood by the window, staring out into the dark streets below. His phone buzzed in his hand, a number he didn't recognize. No name, no caller ID. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end was cold, calm, calculating. "You think this is over?" the voice whispered. "You have no idea what's coming next." The line went dead. Darius stood there, frozen, gripping the phone so tight it felt like it might crack in his hand. Walter walked up behind him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "We ain't scared of them, son," Walter whispered. "Not now, not ever." Darius nodded, but deep down, he knew the voice was right. This fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The city had gone quiet again, but Darius knew better than to trust the quiet. He could feel it in his bones, the kind of silence that didn't mean peace. It meant planning. It meant waiting. It meant something bigger was coming. Walter had doubled the locks on the apartment doors. He kept the old baseball bat leaning against the wall by the window. Every time Darius walked to the kitchen for a glass of water, he could feel his grandfather's eyes watching, listening, guarding. And still, the unease wouldn't go away. That voice on the phone had hit deeper than Darius wanted to admit. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was calm. It was certain. And that made it real. He tried to shake it off. He tried to tell himself that the worst was over. The city had rallied. The truth had come out. The system was crumbling. But in the back of his mind, he knew the machine didn't die that easily. And sure enough, the next move came faster than he expected. It started small. A news report at midnight. A single headline running across the bottom of the screen. Federal prosecutors to review charges against Darius Bennett for national security violations. Darius felt his stomach twist into a knot. Walter saw it too. No, they can't, Walter whispered. But Darius knew they could. And they would. Because the system didn't need to kill him with bullets, not when they could bury him with paperwork. Not when they could label him as a federal threat, lock him in a cell, and make him disappear quietly. The news spread like wildfire the next morning. Reporters swarmed the apartment complex. Cameras waited outside the front door. Questions rang out from every direction. Darius, do you have a statement about the new charges? Is it true you're facing life in federal prison? Do you still stand by what you did? Walter tried to block them out, but Darius, he just stood at the window, staring down at the crowd. It was happening again. They were flipping the script. Again, turning him from a truth-teller back into a criminal, twisting the narrative until it choked him. But this time, Darius wasn't going to let them do it alone. He grabbed his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and called the one person who hadn't turned their back on him yet, Special Agent Daniel Reeves. The call barely rang once before Reeves answered. "I was wondering when you'd reach out," Reeves said quietly. Darius didn't waste time. "They're coming after me again," Darius said. "Harder this time." Reeves didn't sound surprised. "They can't let you walk free, kid. Not after you embarrassed them on live streams across the country." Darius's throat tightened. "What do I do?" Reeves let out a long breath on the other end. "You fight smarter," Reeves replied. "You don't let them drag you into their courtroom again. You go above them." Darius frowned. "What does that mean?" Reeves paused, and then dropped the real bomb. "It means you go to Washington." The words hit Darius like a sledgehammer. "Washington?" Darius whispered. Reeves' voice dropped even lower. "DC's already watching this. You've got more people behind you than you realize. But if you don't take this fight to them, they'll bury you here before anyone up top even gets a chance to step in." Darius felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Could he really do that? Could he really take this all the way to the Capitol? He looked over at Walter, who was watching him like a man who had seen too many battles end the wrong way. Darius put the phone on speaker. Walter crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes. "And what makes you think they'll listen to him in D.C.?" Walter asked. Reeves didn't flinch. "Because they already are." The line went quiet for a beat. Then Reeves spoke again. "I can get you there," Reeves continued. "But it's going to take everything you've got left. And once you're on that plane, there's no turning back." Walter looked at Darius. No words. Just a look. The kind that asked the real question, "Are you ready for this?" Darius swallowed hard and nodded. "Set it up," Darius whispered into the phone. "I'm ready." Darius Bennett stood at the edge of the runway, clutching a worn-out backpack like it was the last thing tethering him to the life he used to know. Behind him stood Walter, his grandfather, his protector, his entire world. The man who had raised him when no one else had stepped up. The man who had never, not once, let him face anything alone. The hum of the small private jet in front of them cut through the early morning silence. Agent Reeves stood at the bottom of the stairs, motioning for Darius to move quickly. The clock was ticking. Walter placed a steady hand on Darius's shoulder. "You sure about this, son?" he asked, his voice rough but proud. Darius didn't answer right away. He just stared at the plane, at the sky, at everything this moment meant. He knew once he stepped on that plane, he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He wasn't just fighting for Leonard Moore. He wasn't just fighting for Kansas City. He was fighting for every voice that had ever been silenced, every life that had ever been buried under a broken system, every person who had ever been told they didn't matter. Darius turned to Walter, his throat tight. "I'm sure," he whispered. Walter pulled him into a hug, tight, fierce, and unshaken. "You carry all of us with you," Walter whispered in his ear. "Don't you ever forget that." Darius nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Walter let go, his eyes shining with tears he refused to let fall. "You come back to me, you hear?" Walter added, his voice cracking just a little. Darius forced a smile. "I will," he promised. And then he turned and walked toward the plane. Every step felt heavier than the last. But he didn't stop. Not this time. Reeves met him at the bottom of the stairs. You've got maybe one shot to make them listen, Reeves said quietly. Once you land in DC, it's game time. No more hiding. Darius nodded, gripping the strap of his backpack tighter. Good, Darius replied. I'm done hiding. Reeves cracked the smallest smile. That's what I needed to hear. They climbed aboard, and the door sealed shut behind them with a heavy thud. The engines roared to life. And just like that, Darius Bennett was in the air, leaving Kansas City behind, but carrying the weight of it on his shoulders. The flight felt like forever. Darius sat by the window, staring out at the clouds, replaying every moment in his head, every risk, every loss, every truth that almost slipped away. But this time, it wouldn't. By the time they landed at Reagan National Airport, Darius could already feel the pressure closing in again. Reeves handed him a plain black jacket and a baseball cap, trying to shield him from the cameras already gathering outside the terminal. But it didn't matter. People already knew. Reporters shouted his name. Cameras flashed like lightning. Questions flew at him from every angle. Darius kept his head down as Reeves led him to an armored SUV waiting at the curb. You ready to face the hill? Reeves asked as they climbed inside. Darius nodded, his voice steady. I've been ready. The SUV cut through the heart of the city, passing monuments and marble buildings that had stood longer than Darius had been alive. Power lived here. Real power. The kind that didn't care about headlines or street protests. But Darius wasn't here to ask for their attention. He was here to demand it. They arrived at the Capitol steps just as the committee hearings were about to begin. Reeves turned to him one last time. This is it, kid, Reeves whispered. You walk in there. You don't flinch. You don't back down. Darius nodded, gripping the flash drive in his pocket, the last copy, the final piece of everything he had fought to protect. He stepped out of the SUV and climbed those long, heavy steps, alone. The room was massive, packed with senators, aides, and press. The kind of place built to intimidate you before you ever opened your mouth. But Darius didn't shrink. He stood tall. When they called his name, he stepped up to the microphone. The flash of cameras didn't make him blink. The cold stares from lawmakers didn't make him sweat. He took a deep breath and told them everything. He told them about Leonard Moore, about the tampered evidence, about the corrupt DA, about the system that tried to crush him. He showed them the files, the footage, the proof. And when they tried to cut him off, when they tried to twist his word, she didn't back down. Not once. He stood there until every last word had been heard. And when he was done, the room fell silent. Not because they didn't believe him, but because they finally did. As Darius walked out of that chamber, reporters swarmed him again. But this time, the headlines had changed. Darius Bennett faces Washington and wins. Youth activist forces, federal investigation into corruption, from accused hacker to national hero. And for the first time since this all began, Darius knew he had won. Not just for himself, not just for Leonard, not just for Kansas City, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't have a voice. And as he boarded that flight home, knowing the fight would never truly be over, Darius Bennett smiled to himself. Because now, he wasn't fighting alone. Sometimes, it takes the youngest voice in the room to remind us of the oldest truth, that silence is the only thing more dangerous than injustice itself. Darius Bennett's story isn't just about hacking or courtrooms or government corruption. It's about what happens when ordinary people find the courage to stand up and speak. Many of us watching today have lived long enough to see systems fail us, to see justice delayed or denied. But what this story shows us, what Darius teaches, uses that no matter how small you feel, no matter how powerful your enemies seem, the truth doesn't lose its strength just because it's ignored. It waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward. And maybe you're thinking I'm too old to fight like that. But let me tell you something. Wisdom, experience, and the lessons you've carried for decades, they matter. You are the steady hands guiding the next generation. You are the voice reminding them that real change takes all of us together. So if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Tap that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us why our voices still matter.